Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing the books that I read in March, and I'm excited to share all these books with you. I read 4 of them. And so if you are new to my channel, I created this channel as a homeschooling resource to give you curriculum ideas, organizational ideas, and also ways to invite Christ into your homeschool space. So if you're interested in those things, please hit that subscribe button and let's talk about some of these books. Okay, so the first book I wanted to mention is The Unexpected Deliverer. This is a very quick read, as you can see. It is very, very small, and this video will be coming out after Easter time, but I feel like this is a great Easter type book, and I'm really sorry if you can hear like construction going on in the background of this video. They're moving a bunch of rocks in the people's house behind mine, and so it's kind of loud. So hopefully that's not coming through, but if it is, I'm really sorry. And so I really, really love this book. I feel like it would be a good book to read every single year right before Easter time, just to kind of remind you about everything that Christ did. So it just goes through his story kind of and talks about all the different things. And this is by Emily Bell Freeman and David Butler, whom I really, really love. And I don't feel like you have to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to really enjoy this book. It's very Bible focused and just goes through Christ's life. And one of the things that I really love from this book, I've mentioned it already in a different video, but I hadn't really thought about it. One of the books that I do use to lead up to Easter week calls Wednesday Betrayal Wednesday and talks about Judas Iscariot and everything that he did in that betrayal. But this book kind of approaches it differently. It talks about how Wednesday is fairly silent in the scriptures. There's not really a whole lot known in the scriptures about what was going on that Wednesday before Christ was crucified, and how sometimes that silence, there's silence before big things happen, right? There's just those moments of kind of calm before kind of the craziness. And I just had never approached it that way or thought about it that way. So I just loved the different perspectives it gave me. Again, it's a very short book and just has some very short points. So it talks about the entrance, him coming into Jerusalem. It talks about the temple and what's going on there and the silence. So this is my favorite chapter, right? Because it's talking about that silence on Wednesday before everything amazing happens. It's sad, but then also super amazing and life-changing for all of us. So I just wanted to mention this book, even though it was a super quick read and I read it at the beginning of the month and it will be after Easter. I feel like it's a really good book just to learn more about everything that Christ has done for us. And this title of The Unexpected Deliverer, I just really love that. So I'll make sure all this stuff is linked down below with the reviews that I have. I don't have reviews for all of these books, but the ones I do have reviews for, I'll make sure they're all linked down below so you can check them out. Okay, the next book I read was Digital Minimalism, and I really love this book. It's actually my husband's book, so I have all my neon note cards over here that I'll be reading from, but he handed it to me a few weeks ago. I don't even remember if this was on my list for the year. I'd have to look. But he had been going through some of his books and getting some from his office at work and was like, oh, my wife would love this book. It's right in her wheelhouse. And he was not wrong. It is very much in my wheelhouse. It does have a little bit more research in it. I don't feel like it was hard to read, but there was some stuff that maybe if you're more interested in research that you would find it more fascinating. I love the stories and like real life application type stuff, and it has that as well. And so I really, really enjoyed the book, but there is some parts that might be harder to read if you don't enjoy reading about research quite as much. But this book is just amazing. So Cal Newport starts the book with kind of talking about the emergence of the smartphone, why that came about. He talks about the need for digital minimalism and gives a definition of what that even means. And then the second part of the book, which is a big chunk of it, focuses on what we can do to be digital minimalists. And I don't know if I'd say I'm a complete digital minimalist, which is really hard to say, by the way, but I am a quasi one. Like, I want to be more of a digital minimalist. I don't like carrying around my phone. I will have it with me like when I go places and stuff, but it's usually always in my bag. I do not like having my phone in my pocket. I have always hated that. It drives me absolutely insane. So it sits on the counter most of the time, and I actually really enjoy that. And my phone is on silent or on do not disturb most of the time, which is something he actually recommends. Because if you have somebody that's super important or you're waiting to hear back from somebody, you can change the settings on your phone to make sure those ring through. But otherwise, most things aren't that important. Like, we've been trained to respond to things immediately, but there is no need, and we waste so much time doing that because then we get pulled in to the phone. So I really loved some of his suggestions and everything he gave. And so he talks about the smartphone, the iPhone coming out, and I didn't have a smartphone until about 4 years ago. And so it was several years after the smartphone came out, just because we were in college, we were a PhD, my husband was a PhD student, we didn't have tons of money, and we just didn't have a reason for it. Like, we had our computers. He's like, I'm sitting in front of a computer all day doing work. We have no reason to have a smartphone, which was completely true. It was just when he started to go on the job market that we finally got a smartphone and finally took the plunge, I guess. But before that, there was just no need for it. And I think that's the case. There's a lot of things he talks about dumbing down, like getting a dumbed down phone, which is what we wanted a dumbed down phone. But you go into the phone shop, whatever they're called, Verizon, Sprint, whatever. You go in and they're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Like, you just want a little phone? You don't want a smartphone? And they just never understood. But it might be easier now to get one of those types of phones. But like 5 years ago, it was so hard for us, and we didn't want a smartphone, but it was so hard to find a dumbed down phone that didn't give you all the things on it. So I really loved that suggestion, that maybe you don't have to go to that extreme, but maybe just dumb down what you're using on your smartphone. Put, delete apps, delete all the games, all that kind of stuff that could be a distraction. He also suggests maybe having certain times of day when you're allowed to browse your phone or the internet, like any social media type stuff, because when you schedule stuff in, it's a lot more likely that you will follow through with it. But if you don't put any sort of limits on it, you could spend hours and hours every single day browsing through all this technology. And something that makes me nervous about doing that as a mom is my kids watch those things, and so they're going to think that that's okay, and also think that I'm ignoring them, right? Because my phone is always in my face, or my computer is always in my face, and I'm not focusing on them at all. So putting down the phones, not spending so much time on our phones. Some of the things that I love that he said, so I'm looking at my notes on my computer over here. But one of the things that was my favorite in suggestions for how to become a digital minimalist was to kind of reclaim leisure time. And how a lot of us, we don't really have a whole lot of leisure, especially really good leisure time, okay, that we've planned out and that we're actually learning things in. We run from thing to thing to thing to thing all the time, or we spend hours on our phone. But we're not interacting with the world with our hands. I want to call them phalanges, like bones, like dancing phalanges. If you've seen that Bones episode, let me know in the comments below. And so things that interact with our hands. So we suggest, maybe setting some leisure time every week to learn a new skill. And he's like, an easy skill, and he suggests building a headboard. I'm like, that's not an easy skill for most people unless it's a very simple headboard, but learning to garden or, learning to build something or something like that. And I thought this would be great applied to homeschool as well, because you could take those hands-on learning projects and every single week teach your kids a new skill. And just that desire for learning, it's not bad if it's on a computer, if you're learning a programming language or something, but it's better to make sure it's hands-on. And so you can have some of those computer things, but make sure there's also a lot more hands-on, real-world stuff going on and not just in front of a digital device all the time. So I really love that. And then let me just tell you a few quotes that I thought. There was a few really short snippet ones that were super powerful. He said, humans are not wired to be constantly wired. And I just love that. I just thought it was a fun little play on word thing too. And then someone else, I don't think this was him saying this, I think he was quoting someone else that says, my argument is not anti-technology, it's pro-conversation. And there was another experience in the book. I'm not going to share all the experiences. I could talk about this book for hours, but one of them was someone wanted to make sure they had real life interactions with people and not just on their phone through texting or through email, but where you're either talking on the phone or you can see them on video. So you're learning to read people's emotions, but also understanding what their emotions are, because that's so hard sometimes on a text message. And so he set aside a time every day when he was commuting, because he had like an hour-long commute. I think he lived in the Bay Area in California. And so he would commute home, and he's like, from 5 to 6 or whatever, you can just call me and I will talk to you. And I just thought that was great. I don't like talking on the phone. I have never liked talking on the phone. That is not just a new world thing with the iPhone type thing. I just have always been terrified of it. I used to memorize everything I had to say on the phone because it scared me. And I worked several secretary jobs and got comfortable talking on the phone in that time. But then after I'm done working there, I'm still like stressed about talking on the phone. So I'm like, I don't know if I'd like that exactly, but just making sure you're interacting more with the real world than just through a text message and an email. It's so important to have those interactions, to understand people's emotions, to see where they're coming from, and to just make an effort to do that. So I could talk about this book for hours. I would highly, highly recommend it. I took a ton of notes. I would have marked this book up a ton more, except it's not my book, it's my husband's book, so I did not mark it up. But if you want a good book to read that gives a lot of good suggestions on how to minimize your digital, intake, I guess we'll call it, then I feel like this is a really good book to read. Okay, the next book that I read was Elizabeth Smart. It's My Story. She has a few, I think she has 2. I don't know if she has a few books. I think she has 2 books. And the other one I think talks more about redemption kind of and getting through this stuff after. This book specifically focuses on her story of being taken from her home as a 14-year-old girl, and then what happened during those 9 months she was held captive. And she is very similar in age to me, and I live in Utah and remember this happening when I was I wasn't a young child, I was a teenager as well, still a young child. And so I remember this happening, and when I heard that there was a book out, I always have wanted to read it, but again was slightly hesitant. It's not an easy book to read. It's covering a very difficult topic. Her story is not easy to read. And so it's amazing that she was willing to share it. But there were some things that I really loved. I feel like even though she shares a lot of the horrible things that happened while she was being held captive, in this situation for 9 months, and she moved all over the place. There's so many things about the story I just didn't even know. I had a very basic understanding of what happened. And so this obviously goes into a lot more detail and tells you everything that was going on and where she moved and how they got food, how they got water, all that kind of stuff, and how she was rescued. It basically ends with her being rescued and then a few little things after. But I just gained so much insight to her as a person and to her faith in God through reading this book, because even though it's absolutely horrible, I can't even imagine one person doing what happened to her, to another person. How could someone be so cruel and so distanced from Christ that they could do that to another human being? It's so hard to imagine. And I feel like the hardest part for me with this story is that it's an intriguing, twisted story, which I know sounds kind of weird, but it's hard for me to remember as I read it that this is about a real person, because it almost reads as a very intriguing, twisted fiction novel. And that's not the case. I had to keep reminding myself, no, this is about a real person, and somebody actually did these things to her. And I love throughout the whole book how she, even through the hardest of circumstances, and again, she's only 14 years old, she's able to see all the little tender mercies that God gives her, and she shares those things, and how he kind of carries her through this whole experience. And I just thought that was completely beautiful. And there's a quote that's from the beginning of the book that I wanted to share with you. It says, "When faced with pain and evil, we have a choice. We have to make a choice. We can choose to be taken by the evil, or we can try to embrace the good." And I just thought that was beautiful. And then at the end, when she is rescued and goes back to her family, I really loved how her mom said not to give Mitchell, and that she calls him Mitchell throughout the whole book, that's his last name, another moment of her time, that she needs to move forward and focus on good things. And she mentions that's what she does. She goes forward and focuses on good things. And obviously it didn't make it easy. I'm sure there was still so many issues and lots of hard times, but she went forward and chose to focus on that good and to embrace that good. Like that quote in the beginning says, instead of focusing on all the evil things that happened to her and letting him win, right? Because if she kept focusing on that and turning back to that and just letting the evil consume her and the hatred and bitterness, you know, for everything that he did, then he would have won, right? Instead, she chose to focus on Christ. So I just think this is a beautiful story. Again, it's not the easiest read as far as it just has a lot of sensitive topics in it. So if you are very sensitive already to those things, this book might not be for you. But I still feel like it was just great to gain deeper insights into her story and to just have a deeper understanding of who she is as a person, and I greatly admire it. So the last book I wanted to mention is Beyond Valor. I just finished reading this a few days ago, and this book just came out last year, so it's new. It's very new. I don't very often read basically brand new books, so this was a new experience for me. But I'll read this part right here so you kind of understand what the story is. It says, a World War II story of extraordinary heroism, sacrificial love, and a race against time. And when I first started to read this, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I really, really loved the way that the story started. It's the grandson is talking. So John Irwin right here is the grandson of Red, who the story is about. And he was at his grandpa's funeral and realized that he didn't know much about his grandpa as a war hero and wanted to learn more. So then he started to research for years. I think his grandpa died around 2002. I can't remember exactly. And so he started to do years and years of research and talking to people traveling around the world to gather information to write a story about his grandpa, which I just thought was so cute and tender. And so that was just a beautiful part of this story. And so just short summary, because I don't want to ruin it for you, but it does start out by basically telling what happened to his grandfather, and then it shares more of the experience later on in the book. But his grandfather was burned because they were flying B-29s and bombing Japan during World War II in 1945, I believe. And so he was part of some of the missions that helped basically end the war, or at least bring it to a close faster than it would have been otherwise. And so he was a radio man on those airplanes, at least on his airplane, not on all the airplanes. And so he got burned because he would drop signals to the other planes, and one of them shot back up the chute, a phosphorus bomb, and blew up all over him. And so he's covered in phosphorus and burning. And so it has pictures of him in here, and he's just covered in burns and everything like that. It immediately burned off his nose, his ears, and just this mess. But yet they thought he was for sure gonna die. And he lived like 50 something years more than that. And I just thought that was amazing. But he goes through and talks about before that happened, what everything that leads up to that, and then a little bit afterward as well, and how his grandfather gets the Medal of Honor for what he did since he saved his whole plane. And I'm not gonna tell you what he did. You'll have to read the book if you wanna hear what he did. But he saves his plane and several other planes probably too because of what he did. And I just thought it was a beautiful book, and it talks a lot about he was a strong Christian and how praying and his faith in God is what helped him make it through the experience and helped him survive. And it gives other experiences from the war. So this doesn't just completely focus on his story. It talks about what other people were doing. It gives a lot of background on the planes. So there were some things I found more interesting than others. I love the stories, but the little details about the planes I don't care as much about. But if you like planes, then maybe you do. And then it talks about a few other things going on in other parts of the war throughout the world, not just where they are in the Pacific Ocean, whatever, over in that area. And so I thought that was interesting as well, that they shared some of these other experiences and shared also how strong prayer was during this wartime, and how General Patton had encouraged everyone to pray more because that was how they were going to win the war. And I thought that was beautiful. And at the end of this book, in the appendix, there are 7 prayers, and it talks about 7 events throughout history in America of prayers that helped shape different events like Gettysburg and different things like that. So I just thought that was a cool little addition you can read. They're just very short. So I really enjoyed reading this book. It's again a fairly quick read. It's not very long, and the story is It's very intriguing. It's also, you know, it's very sad, but it's also very happy and just full of faith. And I just really loved that. So those are the books I read in March. I really loved all of them. I learned so much from all of them. I'm excited to read some new books in April. And so if you enjoy seeing these kind of videos, please give me a thumbs up and I will see you next time.